What if we said there was never meant to be the Viking Age? Indeed, believe it or not, but that is what could have been. If one great king had not unified all the small kingdoms to form a big one, there would not have been a Viking Age. What did he do? How was he then able to do great things? Here is just about everything you wanted to know about the great king, Harald Fairhair. Harald Fairhair was a king, a great warrior, and one of the most honorable men in Norway. In addition to all these qualities, this man had nice hair. Actually, the name Fairhair could be attributed to his long, glorious hair, and his story is as striking as that name. In the 800s AD, Norway was not a single country like it is today. It was known as the North Way, and it was a conglomeration of petty kingdoms within the Viking fold, headed by different chieftains. There was no single king, no national identity, and definitely no Norwegian sports team. It was mostly a bunch of bearded leaders, each ruling over their small towns or villages, acting like they were more powerful than they actually were. But all that changed when Harald came along. Young Harald Fairhair came from a family of small Viking kings, most of whom met some pretty brutal and unlucky ends. One of his great-great-great-grandfathers drowned after passing out in a vat of mead, another was sacrificed by the Swedish, one was buried alive, and there's even a story of one being suffocated by demons in his sleep. Most of his ancestors, however, died the classic Viking way, either in battle or at the hands of their own family members. The most recent tragedy in Harald's family was his father, Halfdan the Black, who died in a freak accident. He was traveling on a sleigh over the frozen sea when the ice cracked and he fell into the water. This made Harald a king at the cool age of 10 years, making him king over the small kingdom of Vestfold. Despite the fact that Harald was only a child when he ascended to the throne, he turned out to be a strong, good-looking, and wise king. Indeed, he never spared his enemy, and had grown so strong that he captured the 5 kings in one battle. But when he first took the throne, many of the older Viking leaders in Vestfold weren't too happy about taking orders from a kid who couldn't even grow a proper beard yet. These leaders, called Jarls, tried to overthrow young Harald. Thankfully for Harald, he had an ace up his sleeve, Duke Guthrum, his father's military advisor and a fierce warrior. With Guthrum's help, Harald, who was much tougher than anyone thought, quickly organized his army and prepared for battle against the rebellious Jarls. Harald Fairhair's first major opponent was a king named Gandalf. Yes, that was actually his name. Gandalf thought he could quickly take control before Harald could gather his strength, but Harald wasn't the type to hesitate. With his fierce ally Duke Guthrum, Harald ambushed Gandalf's army, cutting off their escape. In the battle that followed, both Gandalf and his son were killed. After that, Harald heard about another rival plotting to overthrow him. Instead of waiting for a full-on fight, Harald sent a group of Viking warriors to sneak into the enemy's city at night. They set fire to the castle while everyone was sleeping. When the would-be king and his men ran outside to escape the flames, they were met by Harald's warriors, ready with their spears. It was another swift victory for the young king. Feeling confident after these victories, Harald sent some of his men to deliver a message to the princess named Gyda. He wanted her to be his queen. But Gyda was not impressed. She told Harald's messenger that she wasn't interested in marrying a king who ruled just a small part of Norway. She wanted to marry someone who ruled a whole country, like Gorm the Old, who had united Denmark, or Eric Weatherhat, who had brought Sweden together. If Harald wanted to win her hand, she suggested he'd need to become the king of all Norway, not just a small piece of it. When Harald's men returned with Princess Gyda's message, they asked the king if they should just burn down her castle and take her by force, but Harald reacted differently. He admired her courage and confidence, Instead of being offended, he decided she was right. He wanted to be the kind of king worthy of her. On that day, Harald made a bold vow. He swore not to cut or comb his hair until he had joined together all the realms of Norway. Without wasting time, Harald mobilized a strong force of soldiers and attacked the lesser kingdoms across Norway. Many kings were surprised by the speed at which Harald was willing and able to launch an attack, and by the time they managed to mobilize their troops, they were already losing. This way, one after another, the little kingdoms were captured by Harald, and slowly, he was moving nearer to his dream of becoming King of Norway. Many details about the 10-year-long bloody campaign after the vow of Harald are still unknown, but certainly nobody could have prevented it. He was a warrior with long hair that many of his men said they saw leading the charge, and so he went on to conquer the coastal districts, fjords, and mountains. His armies were too powerful to withstand, and no one could dare to stand in his way. Harald won battle after battle, conquering one tiny kingdom after another, defeating anyone brave or foolish enough to challenge him. At one point, outside Trondheim, Harald fought and defeated 8 kings in 8 battles to claim the city. 3 rival kings teamed up in another battle to take him down, but Harald defeated them in a single fight. Eventually, many enemy kings gave up at the sight of Harald's banners on the horizon, raising white flags in surrender before the battle even started. When a king was defeated, some of his people fled the country to become Vikings, setting sail on expeditions to avoid Harald's rule. Others chose to make peace and become Harald's loyal followers. As Harald conquered each district, he appointed a jarl or earl to oversee it. These earls were responsible for keeping the peace, delivering justice, and collecting taxes. Since the earls got to keep a third of the money they collected, they were more than happy to serve Harald. In fact, they often became richer and more powerful than they had ever been before. Harald Fairhair expected his appointed jarls to contribute to his growing national army. He demanded 60 warriors from each jarl and 20 more from each jarl's heirsers, the lesser nobles under them. This wasn't too hard to achieve. Men from all over Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, inspired by Harald's legendary victories, flocked to join his army. They sought glory, treasure, and the chance to fight alongside the famous hero king, known for his long, uncombed hair and matching floor-length beard. Harald became even more feared as he led a terrifying group of over 60 Viking berserkers, fierce warriors who would charge into battle, tearing apart enemies with their bare hands in uncontrollable rage. Over time, Norway was divided into 2 sides, those who supported Harald Fairhair's kingdom and those who refused to bow to him, preferring to stay as rulers of their small kingdoms. This tension led to the epic battle of Hafrsfjord around 880 AD. Harald sailed his fleet into a fjord, smashing into the enemy's ships. His opponents were led by rulers with fierce names like Solvi Bandylegs, Kjotvi the Rich, Thor Hagalang, and Had the Hard. The battle raged all day, leaving many men at the bottom of the fjord. It was one of Harald's most intense and decisive battles to unite Norway. At the end of the slaughter, bloody Harald Fairhair stood at the front of his ship and watched as the ships of the enemy disappeared underwater. He had permanently united Norway after a decade of warfare. With his mission complete, Harald finally kept his vow and had his hair combed and cut. It had become so wild and tangled over the years that people had started calling him Harald Sufa, meaning shock-headed Harald. But once his long yellow hair was untangled and trimmed, he earned the name Harald Fairhair. And that's how he was known forever after. Harald didn't forget Princess Gyda, which was why he made his vow in the first place. True to her word, she agreed to marry him now that he was the king of all Norway. As King of Norway, Harald Fairhair focused on protecting his kingdom from enemies across the North Sea. Many of his old foes had fled to places like Iceland, the Shetland Islands, the Orkneys, and the Hebrides to escape his rule. But they didn't stay quiet for so long. Using their old Viking tactics, they launched summer raids on Norway. Harald wasn't going to let that slide. He sent fleets to these distant lands, attacking anyone who dared to raid his kingdom. It wasn't long before the raids stopped, and the people learned to respect his power. Harald Fairhair ruled Norway for over 50 years as a fair and strong king. He died around 933 AD at the age of 83, and is remembered as the father of his people, the greatest king in Norwegian history, and a major figure of the Viking era.